Hello everyone, this is part 4 out of 4 on metahuman body customization. And today we're going to take a look at Chaos Cloth Asset to get a result like this. Now Chaos Cloth Asset is used if we're using Chaos Cloth, but that doesn't mean that we can't use the previous setup with the previous iteration of this, which was weight painting in a skeletal mesh. But in this case, this works from a static mesh. It's not a complex procedure. It's going to create a good looking simulations. We can add wind to them. There's a couple of caveats. Self collisions are not great, but it's going to automatically transfer weights and collisions. So we're going to need a full body for this. Metahumans do not have a neck, so neck cloth might be slightly problematic. So we'll need to work on that with a couple more steps, or we might not even have a way to solve it with Chaos Cloth for now. So if you have a way to blend the neck of the metahuman to the body, that's going to be awesome. And that's doable, and I'll be creating a video on how to do that in Blender very soon. But let's take a look at Chaos Cloth right now. So as it says, we're stopping sim here and we have our sequencer. As it says in the title, this is done through a static mesh. Now I have this static mesh here. It's highly recommendable and possible that you need to have this to match the exact positioning of the metahuman body on the A pose. Otherwise, the transfer of weights is going to be very problematic. We had the same issue in the previous video with the auto transfer weights from Unreal. But in this case, we do need this as best as it can get. So let's actually go ahead and go into our Chaos Cloth folder, and we're going to create it from scratch. So we're going to right click anywhere in the empty. We are going to look for cloth, and we're going to have our cloth asset here. And we're going to call this YouTube tutorial cloth. Now, obviously, if you don't have the Chaos Cloth plugin enabled, none of these will show up. Chaos Cloth asset and asset editor. So once we have this on, we're going to double click on it, and a couple of things are going to happen here. There's a whole bunch of nodes right here. Now, this can be a little cumbersome as you first watch this, or as you first open it, but to be completely honest, we're just going to be using a couple of these. So all of these, from long range to stretching to bending to mass, aerodynamics and dampening and collision spheres, all of these we don't need to be using, because we're going to be using one that pretty much encompasses all of those. And at the same time, we're not going to be using LODs, but just know that you can set up LODs. But right now, we're just going to leave everything by default, and we are going to recreate that last node right there, which is going to be our Chaos Terminal. So we're going to call this Terminal, and this is our final node. Now, let's start from the beginning, and we'll end up wiring everything correctly at the end. So at the beginning, on a default setup, we have USD import. We're not going to be using USD import, so we delete it, and we bring a static mesh import. Now with this one, we're now going to simply wire it to transform positions if we need to do any transform positions. Since mine matches perfectly because I managed to do that previously in the modeling editor, I'm just going to delete that. I highly suggest you do that in the modeling tools rather than doing it in here. And then we have our transfer weights. Now this is the very first node in which we're going to start working. Now, before we do that, we should obviously bring in the static mesh that we just created. So we're going to look for it in clothing, and then Chaos Cloth, static meshes. And this is our guy, so we're just going to simply drag and drop. And it's still talking about LODs, but we're going to wire everything in a second here. So static mesh import, just bring it in. Highly recommend that you make these nanite before you bring them in. Transfer skin weights. And this is where we get the transfers from the metahumans. We're going to find the preview of the metahuman we are using. In this case, this one's mine, and it fits perfectly because I made sure that it fits perfectly with a little bit of sculpting on the sleeves. We're going to hit accept here. And now that's transferred all the skins to our preview here. We don't have a preview because we haven't wired everything else. So let's actually go ahead and wire everything. So Unreal stops doing that. So now that we have that, we have our skinned asset right here to the metahumans, and then comes the weight painting. So weight map max distance, in this case it's just a weight map node. What this is going to do is tell the engine which parts or which vertices are going to simulate. Now in here we have all the properties that we're going to start working with in a second, but first I recommend that we switch to 3D Sim. That's going to make our life easier to paint. And here in this little viewport is where we are going to start painting black or white. In this case, I'll paint some white here. White is yes, please simulate. Black is do not simulate. We here on the left hand side have the ability to switch to smooth, so we can smooth maybe this a little bit so it's not looking that choppy. That looks perfect, and we missed the spot there, which is gonna give us a whole bunch of trouble, so we'll need to make sure that all of that is painted. That looks great. And then here on the left hand side we have brush size, we have attribute values. So 0 is gonna be black and 1 is gonna be white. Remember that white means simulate and black means do not simulate. So we're gonna again soften that up once again just in case. And that's pretty much it, what we do here in the wave map max distance. Now, once we hit accept, we're gonna start seeing this. That might be a problem because we're missing one of the nodes. So we're gonna ignore that. And we're simply going to add the node that we are missing. As of right now, it's just being simulated by gravity. That's why it's falling. We're missing a very crucial node that's gonna replace all of those nodes that we deleted a couple of minutes ago. So simulation default config is the one we want, which is going to make a sim, a very basic sim. We're not going to go too crazy about it on this one because it's a basic first steps into Chaos Cloth tutorial. And there we go. So wave map max distance is perfect. Then we have simulation max distance config. This is essentially how far in units the sim can go. And we have here the explanation. So it's good to have one of these. And then simulation default config, which is the one we used in replacement of all of those nodes. We're using that because there's a lot of the same of those nodes just distributed in here. I am going to just mention the main ones. So simulation at the bottom, iteration count and subdivision count, these are going to make the quality of our sim better. Now, if we have a look here at simulation time, this is how expensive the sim is going to be. So if I go iteration count 5, that is going to jump slightly here, right? Because we now have it between 6 and 7 iterations. Now it's going to be more expensive now. Everything else in here, it's kind of pretty self-explanatory. The collision thickness, the damping, the edge stiffness. So we're going to take a look at one of the more important ones, which is called dampening. So let me find it here, which I believe we are under. Bending is fine, long range is fine, collisions, environmental properties, the dampening coefficient or damping coefficient. So we're going to take a look at that here in a second to see what's the big change, but essentially it makes your cloth heavier pretty much. So it's dampening the velocity at which that cloth is moving. Well, let's continue on. So max distance is fine. Set physics asset. And this is where we tell the engine which physics asset to use. And we're going to pick either for cloth or the normal physics one. I'm just going to pick for cloth now. And what it's doing is it's applying this physical asset, this physics asset, to the skeleton that's going to be running this animation. Let's go now into the preview for a second. Simulation collision config. This is just going to enhance or reduce the collision thickness of that physical asset. And then we finally have a cloth terminal. But let's see in the preview scene, let's bring in our metahuman preview body. And let's bring in a walk animation. So we're going to use the same animation that we had a couple of seconds ago in the sequencer. Walk and look around. There we go. This is the one we want. And now if we hit play, this is pretty much what we get. Now we're having some trouble with the collisions, but it's nothing we can't fix in a second. But first, before we do that, let's go ahead and talk about the dampening. So on the preview here. So we have hard reset for the sim, we have a soft reset for the sim, and then we have pause. We can pause the simulation. So we're just going to let it ride. We're going to hard reset it, and let's take a look at the collision config. Let's see if we enhance the size of these colliders. This should, in theory, there we go, fix our issue. So it was too close. We can see still the knee peaking. Sometimes it's just a simulation viewport here glitching out a bit. But if you still see issues, enhancing the collision thickness is going to fix that. And let's talk about the damping, as I said a couple of minutes ago. And let's see the damping in action. So right now this is very loose and it's looking great, but it's very loose. We may want this to 0.05, and that's making our cloth heavier. If we go for 0.9, for example, you'll see that now it starts being heavier and it starts being like less affected by gravity. It's like very, very heavy right now. So we might need to be sure that we add a 0 at the beginning, because if not, it's like gonna start feeling like it's not being affected. So left drag all of these, the gravity scale, all of these are great to work with customizing your cloth. We're not gonna do all the customization here. Just know the tools are here, but I'll show you one very cool one before we leave here, which is another node called aerodynamics. That means that we can apply wind, a local wind, a fake wind, to our cloth here. So wind velocity right here, if we do, for example, something like 20, we're going to see that we get this. Obviously, we never want to go that far, but if we go 2 or maybe 3, and maybe we do it in the direction that the character is walking, we're going to start seeing how this cloth flows a bit better. It's actually going forwards, that's what's happening. So -10, and we start getting these effects, which start looking really, really cool. At this point, we need to start playing with the self collisions here in the simulation collisions. Actually, no, these are in the default config. We need to start working with the collision properties and make sure that we have self collisions on, and that's going to help with those overlappings of the cloth here so it collides with itself. But that's looking great. So this is going to be like some sort of local aerodynamics. I may want to do some hard reset again here so it fixes itself a little bit. Let's do it. Let's send it into a metahuman. We're going to get rid of the aerodynamics. We're going to rewire everything from default. And let's get it into our metahuman, which is our last step. We're not going to apply the materials here. One more thing we might need to do. You see, if our character has objects like this was connected to the skeletal mesh rather than anything else. What we need to do is, when we are doing our transfer of skin weights, here at the bottom, we have a radius percentage that we need to make a little bigger. It's essentially the radius at which is going to be transferred skins, the skin weight. And that little bit of geometry there was so far away that it wasn't really looking for it. We're going to leave that as is. We're going to save, and now we are going to do our final step. Now, with any metahuman that we may have, I am going to edit the blueprint of this one. We're going to go to the viewport. We're going to delete the cloth, and we're going to do it from the get-go. Any metahuman that we may have, selecting the body, we're going to add, we're going to type cloth. We're going to bring in the cloth component. We're going to call it robes. And we're just simply going to scroll down until we find the slot in which we need to put it. And we are going to select it from the get-go. Now, in here is where we are able to add the materials to our cloth, not from the cloth itself. So in here, we're going to go for, let's see, there we go. We just need to click again. So we're going to find T7, which is the material that was applied to this object here. We're going to apply it on all 3 of the subjects, of the pieces, sections, I should say, of the skeletal mesh. And once we have that running, we now have our metahuman here with a cloth. And if we were to go into cinematics, open up a sequencer, have him in sequencer already, running an animation, and we can see that he is in fact moving with the cloth because the cloth has been skinned perfectly to him. And we just simply need to go to the 0, enable the simulation, and hit play. And there we go. That is Chaos Cloth for a metahuman in this particular case. You can apply it to everything you want, obviously. And next video, we're going to talk about the old method of doing painting on cloth, which sometimes is better, sometimes is worse. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.